Well, joining us live now is attorney Greg Moss, community leader. Mr. Moss, tell us, what are your views on the ongoing curfew and lockdown? Is it really necessary?
It's a wide question, but I think it's an important one. There's no doubt that the Bahamas, as with much of the rest of the world, saw the necessity to close business and operations to get a grip on the passage of the virus through the country. But the question is not whether you had to engage in social distancing and the rest of it. The question is, how do you do that within the context of operating a country and operating businesses and families being able to continue to provide for themselves? And so the answer is that yes, it had to be closed, but this cannot be allowed to remain. And we cannot simply react to this in the sense of a timeline, a kind of automatic mathematical timeline. At this phase we will do this, and at this phase we will do that. It has to be tailored to what is going on in the individual communities and individual islands. And in fact, that is what you're seeing in the States. When the president came out with his recommendations or prescription on what the thresholds should be before the individual states open, that was a recognition that the same threshold would not apply to each state. And the same thing has to be seen here. So one, what applies in Grand Bahama doesn't necessarily apply in New Providence or any of the other islands. And two, even within each community, looking at Grand Bahama in particular again, the question is whether there needs to be a blanket shutdown. This idea that you are going to prescribe, meaning limit, people's ability to make a living and their ability to move throughout the country, while at the same time not providing any kind of amelioration to fill the gap that would cause, is unsustainable. And so for many people, I don't think it's any surprise, certainly it's not a surprise to the central bank and to persons who've been looking at the finances of Bahamians throughout the years, but most people were not able to manage to provide for themselves beyond a week or two, if that, once their employments would have ceased. And so the question is, how do you meet that need? How do you rationally do that within the context of trying to maintain the spread of the COVID virus? And that is a question that again, cannot just be a one-size-fits-all approach. It has to be thought out.
Socially and economically, Grand Bahama has really struggled over the past decade, even longer. We've had Hurricane Dorian in September, which was a major setback for many business owners and many here on the island of Grand Bahama. Now we have COVID-19. How do you think we will survive, so to speak, because we've already been challenged in so many areas? Do you see us coming out of this anytime soon?
Actually, I don't see the Bahamas as a whole coming out of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic during the course of this year. And I think that's starting to be said worldwide. When you look at the statements that there's expected to be a resurgence of the virus in the fall, into the winter, that clearly points to a delayed coming out by the large economies like the US. And there will be a further delay beyond when they finally open, before the Bahamas feels a positive effect of their opening. And so we're looking at, conservatively, I think we're looking at about June, July, August, before there is a grip on this, before people know the direction we're going in, at about the same time that we get hit with the virus again. Production is now going on worldwide of, well, first, research on vaccines. There was a very promising vaccine that came out of Oxford University about 5 days ago, where their test results were 100% successful on preventing the spread of that virus amongst the rhesus monkeys that they used to test for human compatibility. They haven't gone through human trials yet, and they're going to kind of abbreviate that process. In fact, a manufacturer in India is producing the virus even before it is approved for human use, in anticipation of having this 40 million sets of it available. But the point is that even on that timeline, you will not see a vaccine coming out to benefit the larger economies until, conservatively, September, October of this year. And then at that point, you have to then vaccinate wait to see the result of vaccination, see the full drop in that curve, as they keep saying, and then after that, you get toward the end of the year, into January, and after that, people have to get enough confidence coupled with employment in those economies to then be thinking about going on vacation and investing worldwide. So this is something, really, it needs to be said, this is something we're going to be living with at this level until about March, April of next year, when you look at all of the variables. And so that takes us back to the question, what do you do in the meanwhile? There is no way, no conceivable way that most people can survive from now until even September, in the best case scenario, for the US, December, hopefully the best case scenario for the US to start to feel confident again, March of next year. There's no way that they can survive. So the question really is, not so much what kind of regulations we can promulgate, what kind of ideas we can discuss. The basic question is, how do people survive? And that points to a couple things. Let me deal with Grand Bahama first and then the wider Bahamas. In Grand Bahama, you rightly point out that our economy has been in shambles for quite some time. We have, going back to 2005 hurricanes, we've been suffering through this. Our real unemployment level up to Dorian last year was likely between 25 and 30%. And that would not even have been counting underemployment, where people technically had a job, but it had nothing to do with the earning capacity they had before and what they needed to sustain the lifestyle they had before. So in terms of real terms, if you looked at unemployment and underemployment, meaning lesser money than you're accustomed to making, we were conservatively around 50%.
That's an extremely high number.
Unemployed or underemployed in Grand Bahama. And you saw it in the social fabric of the island. You saw it in the families leaving, some members of the family leaving, parents going elsewhere to work, Bimini, Nassau, Ocean Key, wherever they had to go, Abaco. You saw it in the kind of the meltdown of the social fabric, where persons were, how could I say this nicely, doing whatever they had to do to survive. You saw it in the continued instances of people who were living on the streets. We know, I don't want to say it on TV because I don't want to prompt the government through the police going to raid a place for a PR exercise, but we know that there are a number of closed buildings in Grand Bahama that people live in because that's the only shelter they can find. And so that is where we were even before this. So now we have this going on. The Grand Bahama Port Authority has not stepped up in any meaningful way, and that is a criticism, but it's not a new thing. It's just saying that they don't have the capacity to do it. We have seen the shutdown of all basic economic activity in this country. The only economic activity we're seeing being resurgent now is consumer-driven activity, meaning food stores and the hardware stores and so on. And so those are places we don't make money. Those are places we spend money. And so when you look at it, there is no real economic activity generating income to the people in Grand Bahama. That's unsustainable. Unless you're, put it a different way, when the economy in New Providence was performing and there was an alternative economy in Bimini, persons were able to get away with that, the persons in power, because they were able to say there are places these people can go to find employment. That is not so now. And so we have a situation where while the entire Bahamas is suffering, Grand Bahama is suffering even more, disproportionately, because it's misery built on misery. And so what do? I just want to cut to the chase of this. I think this is going to be a recurring statement as we talk, but let me just cut to the chase of it. The government needs to be very serious about treating its own people the way it would treat investors that it wants to see come to this country and stay in this country. We open the floodgates to them. We reduce taxes to them. We give them incentives. We lay out not just incentives, but we partner with them in expenditure to build Bahama or to give them land to build whatever. We need to see Bahamians that way right now. And I'm not saying giving Bahamians land, but I'm saying, not that that's a bad idea, but I'm saying the necessities that are needed need to be provided. What are those? We understand that food is needed. Money is actually needed. These things need to be provided through the government, but not directly through the government. We need to take away the political overtone of what is being suggested so far. We have the infrastructure in Grand Bahama and the rest of the Bahamas to get money and benefits directly from the government to the people. We know what that infrastructure is. It is largely the churches and the civic organizations. We saw that after Dorian, because where the government didn't step in and where the Port Authority didn't step in, the civic organizations like Rotary stepped in right away. And the churches stepped in. They have the infrastructure. They know where the needs are. They have a database of people, more so than even social services does. If you're serious about addressing this calamity and the results that are going to be felt, the social results that are going to be felt, and I mean the negative social results, shortly, if they are not addressed, then you have to start allocating resources, and not just lip service, allocating resources. How much money is going to be given to families in need directly from the public treasury every week or every month until this is finished? What is that figure? How do you reduce the costs, the expenses that people have so that all of that money doesn't have to come from the government? We need legislation immediately, basically to say we all will share in this pain. And when you use that phrase, we're talking about civic, corporate, and individuals. And so the banks have to share in this pain. We need to have legislation immediately to suspend all payments on all mortgages, all interest accumulations, all. And by that I mean those entities that are licensed and operating from in the Bahamas. We're not saying we suspend debt. We're not saying the mortgage is not due anymore. We're not taking away that, but we're saying in our own country, we cannot let you penalize Bahamians at a time when you know they have no money to pay.
There have been some deferral programs when it comes to rental assistance and mortgage programs. How long then? The government has said 3 months. How long do you think we should put these programs in place?
Well, to my mind, there's no program with mortgage assistance yet. It's a request from the government to the banks to say, please be gentle with them. That's not good enough. It needs to be stopped. What is the point of accumulating interest for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? And at the end of that, the country comes out of this, but the debt burden on the people is more than they could ever get out from under. In other words, the people would be financing the cost of coming out of coronavirus. What's the point of that? Why not simply cancel, suspend the accumulation of interest, not the principal itself, but the accumulation of interest during this period? Why not, I know that it's a sensitive topic to say you shouldn't suspend rent or a portion of rent. I think you should. And I say that both as a tenant and as a landlord. I think that the government should suspend the payment of rent during this period, and it should provide for government compensation toward landlords at the end of this period. You talk about, you're going to suspend it and pay it back over a 12-month period. What is wrong with the public treasury paying that back over a 12-month period?
Can we afford to do that?
We can. And that leads to the biggest question. And I have to move past a lot of other things I was about to say to get to the biggest question. The biggest question is, why can't we afford this? And the answer has always been the same, because the Bahamas has never taxed rich people, ever. Under the previous UDP government, the Bay Street Boys government, the Bahamas never did it. When the PLP came to power, one of the promises they made was that they would bring income tax to the country immediately in order to tax equitably the rich people and be able to reduce the taxes on the poor and working class people. That was never done. The country right now is the entire brunt of the financing of this country, entire meaning about 92%, is being financed by the people least able to afford it. Your tax rate right now through indirect taxes is something like 42%. We're one of the highest tax jurisdictions in the world. And that tax rate falls totally on the backs of the poor and what is left of the middle class, because it's a consumer tax. And what that means is that the rest of the money that's sitting out there not being taxed needs to be taxed. In fact, this comes up every now and again. The Bahamas gets blacklisted by the Europeans, the OECD, the FATF, or now individual European countries, on the basis that it has unfair tax competition, and that is because it is not taxing European nationals and companies owned by European nationals in the Bahamas. The question is always, why won't we do it? These people have nothing to lose by being taxed. If they're not taxed here, they're taxed in their home jurisdictions. And so my clients, for instance, I have a number of clients, foreign clients who have said this to me: Greg, we don't mind being taxed, Because if we are taxed here, we write it off on our taxes at home. Because in the sense that our income from here is being taxed at home anyway. And so it's as if the Bahamas Ministry of Finance gets up every year and writes checks to England and America and Canada and France out of the public treasury. It effectively does that by failing to collect the taxes which the nationals of those countries are writing to their home country. And so we have a massive reservoir of taxes here that can be collected. This is why, if you go on Google and you look up what is the average income of Bahamians, even with the massive unemployment, you'll still see the average income of Bahamians about $27,000. We know it's not true. The reason it's that figure is that the countries that compile these data look at the total amount of income being generated by the country, the GDP of the country, and they look at the taxes. Sorry, they divide that by the number of people in the country, and they come up with this figure. What that really means is about less than 5% of the people are making more money than everyone else in the country combined. And if we don't get to serious taxation, we cannot fix this.
Well, Greg, the president of the Grand Bahama Chamber of Commerce appointed a member of the country's Economic Recovery Committee. The 18-member group has been charged to help provide a way forward for the country in response to the many challenges arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. So our Talia Hall tells us that local business leader says that he is proud to represent Grand Bahama. So we'll watch that story, and then you can give us some feedback on that and how you feel about this Economic Recovery Committee.
The newly formed Public-Private Committee will make recommendations to the Cabinet on the long-term economic recovery of the Bahamas, including job creation and stimulating small business recovery and development in response to COVID-19. While President of the Grand Bahama Chamber of Commerce, Gregory is one of the members on the committee, and he says it is important for Grand Bahama to be represented.
We have always, on Grand Bahama, talked about the fact that we need persons from Grand Bahama who are on the ground and who are in touch with what's going on, the specific issues that Grand Bahama has and challenges. And we needed to be in a position to put that on a national level. And so now, with Grand Bahama having that spot on the committee, we really need to get together as a business community and make sure in all the different sectors that we are making contribution to what needs to happen from the national level.
He says Grand Bahamians can be assured that they can use him as their voice.
But I'm only as effective as the participation of the stakeholders on Grand Bahama. Yes, I have some ideas of my own, what we need to be looking at and what we need to be doing. But I don't nowhere near understand and would want to represent Grand Bahama without the input of all the relevant stakeholders. So to the extent I get that input, I can be more effective in representing Grand Bahama to the best of my ability on that committee.
The committee will host their first meeting tomorrow. Now, Lorota says it is his hope that at the end of this initiative, the economy of Grand Bahama becomes vibrant.
To see us come with a national plan in terms of growing and restoring the general economy of the Bahamas, one that would go beyond politics, one that all sides can buy into, so that in the future, even if there are changes in government, we're still committed to a plan going forward that continue to grow instead of resetting every time a government change.
The Prime Minister says he's looking forward to the ideas, policies, and programs that the committee will recommend to help the Bahamas recover and to create jobs and more entrepreneurial opportunities for young people as well. It's Talia Hall, ZNS Network News.
Thank you, Atalia. Well, we have a number of persons also tuning in on our Facebook Live page. Lynette Jervis says, rental assistance is still no help. Reality is they help you for 3 months while other bills multiply, and in time you'll still have to pay back what you've collected, which still holds you in loss and in debt. How do you feel about that? You've spoken a little bit about that. And someone else says, Glenda Bannister says, Grand Bahama has always been a test dummy. Can we just get it right?
Yeah, two very important comments. First, with the rental assistance, the comment is absolutely right. All you're doing is delaying the debt that the person would have to pay, well knowing that the person is not earning an income to be able to manage that debt now or in the future. And so you're creating a situation in which people are going to be defaulting. What is wrong with simply doing away or suspending, freezing the rent during the term of the COVID-19? We know that the government already has powers under the Rent Restrictions Act to do this kind of thing within certain areas. The government has no limit on that power. You can restrict rent down to a zero if you wanted to. You could restrict rent down to a certain sum and say that the government will be paying that sum so that the balance doesn't have to be paid by the Treasury at the end of the day. During this period, there are all sorts of mechanisms available to the government. And that is the whole point of the Constitution providing under Article 29 for emergency powers that suspend the normal Articles 16 through 26 type of rights that people have. What's the point of having the emergency powers, of invoking the emergency powers, of seeing that there's a legitimate need of the people for relief and not bringing the relief? We have to have a system in place where across the board, no one is penalized for being a victim of COVID-19. And so this has to be done. And I keep making the point, that is not enough. You need to do that in residential and commercial properties, and you need to suspend the payment of mortgages for persons who were affected with loss of job or loss of income streams as a result of the closing of the economy. And when we come out of this economy, out of this situation, you restart those and you start clean, not people who are already saddled with debt being saddled with more debt, and as a result having more of a mortgage crisis than we ever had before, more of a rental crisis than we ever had before. It's just setting up the country for failure.
What about the landlords, though? So in some instances, landlords also depend on the funds from their tenants to carry them. What would happen in that event?
They would be in the exact same situation as everyone else in the country. Because if they're relying on that income to carry them, meaning pay their mortgage, they would have also gotten mortgage relief. And so they would not have a loss. And if they're relying on that income to carry them, meaning support their household, that's what everyone is doing. Everyone is suffering loss of income, and those who have suffered loss of income without having the resources to personally cover that end up in the same boat. And the government is then called upon to provide for that. But you cannot shirk the responsibility of the government to provide for the people by preferring one set of people, landlords, banks, and so on, to another set of people, tenants and borrowers and so on.
What are your thoughts on the Economic Recovery Committee?
I think it's an important idea. I am concerned that the committee seems to be made up of, I mean, no disrespect by the statement, but it's apparent on just reading the names, of functionaries of the state, meaning persons who are either directly employed by the state or employed by agencies of the state, or who sit in groupings which support the businesses of the state. It's very difficult to see how such an agency would make, such a committee would make recommendations for the good of the majority, well knowing that those recommendations would hurt them. If you're serious about finding ways out of this, if you're serious about creatively thinking about how to deal with economic recovery, it seems that you should include in that mix the persons who would be most affected by the economic recovery, which are not the employers, you know. It's the employees. And the largest employer even is not represented by the large confederations like the Chamber of Commerce in New Providence or in Grand Bahama. The largest employer are small businesses that collectively employ over 60% of the people in this country. So we tend to look at the for want of a better phrase, the sexy employers. You have a big Atlantis, you have a big company, you employ 200 people, you employ 50 people. They pale in comparison to the small businesses that employ the majority of people in this country, and small business self-employed persons, which are the rest of the employers. And so to simply depend on an agency or a committee again, that is not naturally disposed to having findings, making recommendations which will hurt them for the good of the country, is to set the committee up or the government up for failure, because the recommendations are almost given. They will be the same recommendations that we've seen before.
Lisa Julie asks, in your professional opinion, how long will it take for us to get to phase 5?
Phase 5, as I understand it, where you start opening the borders and starting tourism, we have no control over it. That is where we benefit from persons in other economies having had their economies opened, having earned sufficient money to gain confidence and to feel comfortable traveling, and then traveling. And so we have absolutely nothing to do with that. In that context, the answer really is about 3 to 6 months after the other economies are open, and the consumers who have spent their resources during the closure of their economy have recouped those resources and then feel confident to travel.
Glenda Bannister says, Grand Bahama went through Dorian, now COVID. We haven't recovered from the storm as yet. Hurricane season approaching again, and she feels as if still no vision for Grand Bahama.
Yeah, and that's not
Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. It's not a political statement. I don't know who she is, and in my saying that it's fair, it's not a political statement, because that statement can be made of all governments that we've seen over the last 12 to 15 years. And so, it's not meant to be a criticism. It's just an observation that until we come to the point where we do not live in the Commonwealth of Nassau, we live in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, until our elected officials are more representative of the entirety of the country and not of the enclave that is New Providence, we will not see the public purse, which is accumulated from the entire country, being spread over the entire country. And I mean, I cannot pass that question without also saying this. We have benefited tremendously from the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement. Historically, it has been a very useful tool to attract business to essentially a duty-free area. It's a perfect tool for attracting manufacturing, business, and so on. We have not benefited over the last 12, 15 years from the Port Authority itself. And when you look at what is happening right now, that company has sold off most of its money-making ventures. Most of the utility companies and so on are gone, or parts of them are gone. And I don't want to go through a catalog of it, but it does not have the capacity anymore to do what it was initially designed to do in being a quasi-government for Grand Bahama. And we need to realize that. And we need to get to the point of saying, having recognized that they sold off most of their money-making assets and recognizing that they don't have the financial capacity, what do we do? Do we wring our hands until 2054 and watch Grand Bahama and the people in it continue to suffer? Or do we step in as a government and say, listen guys, we've seen what you've done, we've seen how it's fallen apart, we now need to do what we need to do, and you need to delegate these powers onto another entity, which, I mean, many people have a different views of how that should be done, but which can now have an income generating stream based on those powers without all of the restrictions that you have, and let's get back to dealing with Grand Bahama as a growth center for the Bahamas.
I'm looking at some more comments, some of them which you will not be able to answer. Charmaine Smith Farah says, what is being done for shelters if the virus persists, if we have to continue social distancing? But you talked a little bit about the Rand Memorial Hospital and the fact that that hospital has been compromised since Hurricane Dorian. Now we're in this COVID-19 pandemic, and the Samaritan's Purse, the tent and the pods have also been compromised to a degree this past Sunday. What are your thoughts on that? Many Grand Bahamians are saying it's about time we get a hospital, because we are now in a very precarious place. Hurricane season is upon us almost again. Will be June in about 4 weeks. So what are your thoughts on the Rand Memorial Hospital and what should be done?
I'll get to that. Let me just say this. How to repair a broken economy is not a new question in the world. You could just look at 1929, 1930 with the U.S., when they went through their Great Depression, and what they did to get themselves out of it. When in a Great Depression, when in a time of economic collapse, it is the obligation of the government to spend. This is Keynesian economics, for those who know what that means. The idea that, yes, governments should be fiscally conservative, but not at a time when the economy has collapsed. You talk about housing in Grand Bahama. We have no lack of housing in Grand Bahama, you know. We have a lack of housing that is available to people, that people can afford. We have a deficiency in housing that is fully repaired. And that is a perfect formula for restarting the economy of Grand Bahama. For instance, why wouldn't the Ministry of Housing, for instance, become involved in buying out depressed homes, repossessed homes, and making them now available for persons to occupy, rent, buy, and so on, putting Bahamians to work to do that? You have to use national dollars to stimulate the economy, because we can't sit here and wait for some foreign person to come and do it. When you have a massive construction enterprise undertaken in Grand Bahama, the result of that will be jobs. People now have jobs. As a result of that will be that the stores are now able to open. The construction stores now have real activity. The lunch lady has someone to sell to. They are all the spin-off jobs, but there has to be a restart of the economy. And so you could see the Hurricane Dorian of last year as a negative, and it was. You could see coronavirus as a negative, and it is, but you could also see them as very, very, very valuable opportunities, because they allow for the government to operate under emergency powers, which gives it additional space to do things that might be less palatable at other times. And that space can be used to restart the economy of Grand Bahama.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moss, so much information. 1 minute, do you want to wrap with some final thoughts?
Well, I think my major thought is this, that if we don't get the fundamentals right, we will never come out of this. And the fundamental has to be, why is it that we as a country don't have the money that we need? One, why is it? And the answer has to be that we're not taxing the right people. The fundamental has to be, taking Grand Bahama, why is it that we are so crippled by something that just happened 2 months ago? And the answer has to be because the basics in this island do not work. And we need an opportunity to go and reshape the island. Fundamentals like, why is it that certain social groupings are being so affected? It's because there are disparities in health, in education, in housing, etc., that need to be addressed. And here's the opportunity to address them, not as a band-aid, not as saying we will give you breathing room, but when we come out of this, all the debts you've accumulated, we're going to put on your shoulder and force you to pay it. Let's reshape the enterprise. Let's reshape this experiment. Let's reshuffle the deck. Let's start again.
And a lot of persons are still asking for your comment very quickly on the Samaritans person in the hospital.
There's no way to restart Grand Bahama without a hospital. There's no way to attract business without a hospital. Why in the world we allowed Hurricane Dorian to destroy a hospital? And I don't mean destroy it with the weather that went into it, you know. That was not what destroyed it. What destroyed it was with our inability or our failure to go in and repair it. All of our businesses and homes went through the same weather, and they're not sitting idle. The government needs to go in and repair that. We need an opportunity, we need a plan to say, we are now going to prioritize health in Grand Bahama as we have prioritized health in New Providence. We regret that you're going to have to continue to use this hospital another 2 or 3 years, but we've repaired it sufficiently for that, and we're now going to build a new hospital. I tell you this in closing. If Dorian had struck Princess Margaret Hospital in New Providence, we would not be having this discussion about Princess Margaret. The money would have been applied and it would have been repaired. The question is, why isn't the same being done for Grand Bahama?
Thank you very much. Sasha Swain Gibson says, I enjoyed this interview, very informative and timely. Great job, Mr. Moss. I concur. Thank you very much.